Welcome to my home farm and my top 10 tips for growing dahlias. So it's the end of the year, and this year was the first year that I ever grew dahlias, and I grew 32 different varieties, and boy did I learn an awful lot. My purpose for growing the dahlias was to cut them and use them in the house, so I really wanted a good variety of colour and different shapes and sizes. I purchased the dahlias as tubers from Sarah Raven, planted them out in June, got them harvesting all the way from June to November, and then just dug them up at the end of November after our very first frost, and I've put them into storage for the winter. My first top tip is when you're dealing with dahlias, keep everything really well sanitized and hygienic. Dahlias are susceptible to various diseases and viruses. One of those viruses is a mosaic virus, and that went through my dahlias this year. It's a cellular virus that can transfer through, for example, handling and cutting. So if you're using the same succateurs on a plant that has got the virus, and then you go and cut another dahlia plant that doesn't have it, you can transfer the mosaic virus that way. So it's really important to keep your succateurs and your hands and your gloves really nice and clean when you're jumping and switching from dahlia to dahlia, just to make sure that you're not transferring any diseases or viruses from plant to plant. My next tip is about pinching. Now this is something that is a real hot topic if you're a newbie or a new grower of dahlias. You're going to stumble across pinching and you're going to start to really hear a lot about it, and people talk about it an awful lot at the beginning of the dahlia season. Who's pinched their dahlias? Have they been brave enough? How many of their dahlias did they pinch? And it's a real kind of almost a controversial topic because some people are just really adamant about not doing it because they're really scared that they're going to hurt or damage their plant. And when you are growing a dahlia on from a tuber, you're really doing it with so much love. So then when it starts to really get going and it starts to grow, seems completely the wrong thing to do, to go in and then chop the top of it off. But I have to say, I really bit the bullet this year, and I thought, okay, it's my first year, you know, it's an experimental year. I've never done this before. I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to pinch them all out, and I did, and it was well worth it. Pinching out that top bit of the dahlia really allows the plant to become much bushier and healthier at the bottom. And I followed the Sarah Raven guide of you pinch the top when it gets to about 30 to 40 centimeters high. You pinch that top bit off, and then you don't allow the plant, until you plant it out, you don't allow it to get more than 5 or 6 shoots off the main stem. And I did that. There was a couple that went really bananas and were trying to give me like 12 different big bushy stems that were coming off the main stem, but I kept on cutting them and I kept it really down to like 5 or 6 compact. Made it a lot healthier as a plant, and it gave it a lot more stability off the middle stem. And I really think that that was a winner. I really am going to make sure that I do that now every single year. I really felt that it made the plants healthier, stronger, and a lot more stable. My next tip is support, support, support. Dahlias typically grow about a meter, 1.2, 1.4 meters high. They're very, very tall plants. And when they start growing, you think, is it really going to get that tall? But they really, really do. By the end of the season, they really are hitting those kind of max height numbers if you've got a good, healthy plant. And they really, really do need support. So it's a really good idea to get your support frames in place when they start to first grow, so that they grow up with those frames, as opposed to not putting any support in or just putting a couple of bamboo sticks in and then just kind of adding as and when you need, because you'll find that stuff starts to flop over. If you get any high winds, it'll just break the big stems off, and the whole thing can become a bit of a saga. So I really think that putting in support right from the get-go is the best way to go. There are different support systems you can put in. There's the vertical one, which runs this way, and then you just kind of tie on as it's growing up. I didn't do that. I felt that it was a bit of a hassle. You had to go out there really regularly and constantly be tying up all the stems, and typically then you'd only have the support on one side. So if you've obviously got a round plant, you're only really supporting or being able to tie on this side. The other side is kind of still flopping. So I actually found that a horizontal support system worked really well, and I used what they call stock fencing. It's basically a very large metal net, and each hole or square was about so big, so quite large, plenty of space for stuff to grow through. The wire was quite sturdy and strong, and we laid that down horizontally at different heights. I put one in at 75 centimeters high. I didn't put the one in at the top, which was supposed to be at 1 meter or 1.10, and I did regret that by the end of the season. So this coming year, 2022, I'm definitely going to be using a double support system, 70 centimeters, 75 centimeters high, and then another one at the 1 meter, 1.10 meter high mark. My next tip is where to grow your dahlias. If you're new to dahlias and you're just starting out and you're thinking about where to plant them and you've got options, I would definitely recommend the raised bed as the option. That for me was by far the easiest and most manageable. Pots was pretty good and just as good as raised beds because obviously they're individual. But if you want to do a row of dahlias like I did, then definitely the raised bed was definitely the most convenient, purely because it obviously raises the dahlias up. You're able to see at the actual base of the plant, you're able to see through, you're able to make sure that you catch any diseases, any nasty kind of damp things going on, pests, all those kind of things. It also made it a lot easier to be able to see through and reach for other parts of the plant that needed additional support or needed additional cutting or pruning and cleaning, that kind of thing. So if you've got an option between pots, raised beds or the ground, I would definitely go for raised beds. Also in the ground, you just got to think about what your pH level is and if you've got hard soil, soft soil, drainage, and if you're going to be digging them up at the end of the year. So with a raised bed, you kind of negate a lot of that. So for example, with the raised bed, I filled it with a particular type of soil. I knew that soil was going to be really nice and manageable and easy to work with. And that when I did come to the end of the season to dig them up, they were a nice level for me to be able to just kneel on the side and pull them up individually. So I just thought the raised bed was really worked well for me. Next tip is keep it clean. And that's different to keep it hygienic and sanitized. Keep it clean and tidy. I found my dahlias were much happier when they were clean and tidy. So that meant removing any dead moldy leaves, and I was constantly checking, because it was in the raised bed, I was constantly checking them at the base level. So you do tend to get quite a lot of shoots coming out of the base of the plant, and with that you kind of get a lot of leaves that start to form and fall down and debris and that kind of thing. And I was constantly clearing all of that dead debris, making sure that the air circulation was really good. I made sure that I really didn't have too many leaves growing from the soil level up to about 30-40 centimeters. I didn't really have any leaves. I kept on pulling them off, making sure that the air was flowing through. I had 2 rows of dahlias and I had them in an L shape raised bed. So I made sure that I could see all the way through. I could put my hand through, keep it all nice and clean, keep the soil nice and healthy. And I definitely felt that the dahlias were much happier and producing a lot more when they were in that state. My next tip is what type of variety of dahlia to grow. It was something that I had never even thought about when I originally purchased my dahlia tubers from Sarah Raven. I just went on and I scrolled through the website and I just chose all the dahlias that I thought were pretty, that looked really lovely. And then I just added them to my basket and that's what we got and that's what we grew on. And it wasn't until I started to grow on that I actually started to realize the massive difference between varieties and which varieties actually do work as cut flowers. I very quickly learned that single petal dahlias really are not suitable for the vase. They're very fragile, and because they are single petal, they literally have, just those 5 or 6 petals, and as soon as one falls off, then they all start to fall off, and then you end up with no flower. So I just found that if you're looking at the single petal dahlias, like for example, Lou Farman, Waltzing Matilda, Bishop of York, Bishop of Canterbury, I think, any of those types of dahlias, they are beautiful for your garden as a garden flower in a flower bed, absolutely gorgeous. not that convenient or suitable to be cutting regularly and putting in vases. But to actually cut them, I would definitely stick with more of your hardier varieties of dahlias that are a bit stronger and a bit more robust and can handle the cutting and the putting in the bucket and the carrying in the house and then putting in a vase and then fiddling and manhandling them in the vase. So I would be looking at things like your pom-poms are brilliant. Even your lotus type flower petal dahlias are really beautiful. And your dinner plates. Your dinner plates are gorgeous, but they are very top heavy. Some of them can be quite floppy. So yeah, you just want to think about the different varieties of dahlias you get and why you're growing them and what the purpose is for you to be growing them. My next tip is to think about the soil that you're planting your dahlias into. And we should be thinking about our soil condition and our pH all the time, no matter what plant we're planting in our garden. For me, I was really lucky because it was a raised bed. I actually brought in compost, new compost, fresh compost. I knew that it didn't have any weeds in it, that it was nice and clean, it didn't have any diseases in it, and that it was going to be really nice and fluffy to work with when I planted in my dahlia tubers. And I would definitely say that that was part of my big success this year, was having really good, nice soil to deal with. It also really helped at the end of the season. I knew that when I first planted in my dahlias at the beginning of the year, I knew that I wanted to pull them in the winter. That means when it gets killed off by the last frost, the plant goes brown and dies. You cut it off at the soil level just about, and then you dig up the tubers, like the bulbs of the plant. So the roots and the tubers, you bring that up through the soil, you clean it off and store that for winter. And I knew that I did not want to deal with that in our ground. Our ground is a very high alkaline. It's a clay, thick, heavy soil. In the summer it can go like concrete hard, and in the winter it can go to really thick mud. And I knew that I did not want to deal with that with the tubers. Also because when you're actually lifting the tubers up at the end of the year, if that's what you're planning on doing, the harder and the more difficult your soil is to work with, the more likely the damage is that you're going to cause on the tubers. So I knew I wanted nice fluffy soil that I could just push out the way with my hands, lift the tubers up really easily, and avoid having that damage done to the tubers. My next tip is spacing. Give me space with dahlias. So I saw so much when I first started to look at dahlias online. I saw people that were saying they were growing them 30 centimeters apart, and Sarah Raven, I think, had most of her advice was 75 centimeters apart. And at that space, I thought, my goodness, I'm barely going to get any dahlias in the garden, in the raised bed. So I actually decided to go on 45. When I was lucky enough, I kind of squeezed it to 50 centimeters between each plant, each tuber when I planted them. But 45 to 50 was kind of like my average distance between each dahlia plant. And though I felt that wasn't, it wasn't uncomfortable, and it wasn't, I wouldn't say that it was an absolute no-no, I still thought that was okay. I do not think I would want to plant them much closer than that, not unless you're specifically growing them to fill out a border and then you're just going to leave them alone. But if you want to work in between them, like for example, I wanted to harvest the flowers very regularly, so I knew I needed to be able to access those plants and get into different areas in between, at the back, that kind of thing, to really be able to pick all the flowers. So I would not go any less than 45 centimeters if that's what you're planning on doing, is accessing all the areas of the plant. I think I'm actually going to space it out a little bit more this year, just because I did have 2 or 3 plants in the bed where I put 26 dahlias, and I would say about 3 of them kind of suffered. They were just cramped, they got overtaken by the dahlia next door to them, and they just really didn't have the space to grow. So I'm going to be looking at spacing my dahlias next year at about 55 centimeters. If I can push it to 60, I will. My next tip for dahlias is sunlight. My goodness, I think I read that they prefer sunlight. The dahlias that I had, and as I said, I grew 32 different varieties, every single one of them absolutely thrived in sunlight. Did not like any shade at all. They didn't even really like shade from the next door dahlia. They wanted their own space, their own sunlight, and they just wanted to just grow up into the sun and just take in all that sunlight. So that's another thing I'm going to be thinking about with my spacing and where I'm going to be positioning my different dahlias. But I really do take it into consideration about where the sun comes around on our raised bed. I make sure that I plant my taller ones at the back and my shorter ones at the front, so that I really try and give as much sunlight to each plant as I possibly can. But I would just say sunlight, sunlight, sunlight just seems to be the winning ingredients with dahlias. And my last tip is storage. So it's come to the end of the season. What are you going to do with your dahlias? Well, you've got two options. For us, we're in the UK, we're in Wales. So if you look at the UK on the map, we're kind of halfway through the UK. So we don't get as much sun and as much warmth as the south of the UK, but we're not too bad. We're not as cold as Scotland. So we're really in that middle area. So we have two options here. We could either mulch them, so we leave them in the bed. We would simply wait for them to go brown and the frost to kill them, and then I would cut them off just above soil level, and then I would put about 6 inches of leaf mulch over the top, or mushroom mulch, whichever one you're going for, and then just leave them in and hope for the best. There is the chance that you might lose some dahlias if it's a very, very wet, heavy wet winter. Some of the tubers could rot in the ground if you don't have good drainage. So that is risky, and I did not want to risk that this year. And I wanted to also go through the process of pulling up the dahlias to learn that experience and what it was like. So that's what I did this year. I pulled up all of the dahlias. I put them all through the cleaning process, and I'm soon going to be they're actually drying out at the moment, and I'm going to be putting them into vermiculite and storing them for the winter. But the one thing I would just mention, and this is the core of my tip, is if you are going to pull them out at the end of the year and you think, okay, I'm going to pull them out and store them, no problem, just like I did. What I hadn't taken into consideration is, what am I pulling out of the ground? So when I put the tuber in, I bought the tubers from Sarah Raven. Typically in the packet was about so big, about the same size as a postcard, and you normally got about 2 tubers. So for example, if you're looking at a short carrot, maybe 1 or 2 short carrots is basically what you get, and that's what you plant in. And I couldn't believe the size of the plant that came off that, but sure enough, it did grow into absolutely whopping great big size plants. And so at the end of the season, I cut them off at the soil level, and I pulled them out. And I was absolutely staggered and shocked and floored by what I pulled out. My 1 or 2 little baby tubers, in some instances, have turned into beasts. They are absolutely huge. They have multiplied so many times and had so many baby tubers that the end of the day, it was coming out and it was about the same size as a basketball. And that really shocked me. I was really surprised and caught off guard, because then I thought, hold on a minute. I've bought crates to put in all these tubers to store them for the winter, but now I'm pulling out something the size of a basketball. That's going to take up 1 entire crate. Does that mean I need 32 crates? It really took me by surprise, and I think it's something that isn't really spoken about too much with dahlias. Is we just kind of talk about, okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to leave them in the ground, or are you going to pull them? But we don't really talk about, okay, so if you are going to pull them, what are you pulling? How big is it going to be? And where is that going? Because unless you're willing to then divide them and separate all of those tubers, if you don't have the confidence to do that, you are left with potentially something that is like the size of a football or a basketball for one plant. And then if you've got lots and lots of plants, where are they all going? So you then have to start to think about your storage medium, how much it's going to cost to put vermiculite around all of those that size of tubers and bulbs, and then where are all those crates or boxes going to go for the winter. So it is just something to think about. I think that next year what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to avoid going through the process of pulling them, just because they get so big for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm thinking that next year I will experiment and I will mulch them and see how I get on through the winter. So I hope you found this video useful and interesting. If you did, please leave a comment below and let us know if you've grown dahlias, if you're thinking about growing dahlias, or if you've had a completely different experience. Please leave those comments below. Please subscribe and ring the bell, and we hope to see you on our next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.